Thank you, Dr. Mahlati. See, I got it right this time eventually. Right. So it is now my distinct honor and privilege to invite a leader that we all know, whose legacy continues to inspire us as a country, as a nation, a leader whose dialogue and reconciliation and nation-building initiatives have been one that have been a marvel for many of us, and a true statesman who has guided our country through pivotal moments in its democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me warmly in welcoming His Excellency.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. According to the program, I'm supposed to speak for 15 minutes. So I've got my clock in front of me here to time myself. But first of all, let me say thanks to the Nelson Mandela University and the Strategic Dialogue Group for this initiative which has brought us together today. When Percy told me that the Strategic Dialogue Group had agreed with the university to have this session and who would attend, I volunteered to attend. And the reason I did that is because to put together the intelligentsia, I hope Pegim Gomezulu is going to correct me on this, to put together the intelligentsia in the Eastern Cape like this, I thought was a very important intervention in terms of the national dialogue. Whether we have done what we should have done, I'm not sure. The interventions that have been made are very, very important, I think a very important input into the national dialogue. But I think insufficient. I'll explain that just now, why. Last year, 2024, many people around the country and from outside the country asked me to say something about democratic South Africa at 30. What's your view about South Africa at 30? Challenging question, because now we've got to think about everything that's happened in 30 years and try and summarize it in order to come to certain conclusions. And one of the conclusions I came to was that the country needed a national dialogue. If you looked at the problems in the country, you needed a kind of intervention that would seek to answer the problems. If you look at South Africa at the age of 30, economy is in crisis. The politics is in crisis. Crime and corruption crisis. Even our relations with the rest of the continent crisis. There's nothing you can look at South Africa at 30 which does not say crisis. So I made this my comments on the 30th of April last year, by which time all of the election manifestos of the parties that were contesting the May elections were out. So I had a look at them. And you know what the election manifesto is. It's a promise by a party. I promise to do these things. Please elect me. So I looked at them and I said, no, you're not going to get answers from any of these manifestos about these critical challenges. But a question and answer is needed. Who's going to provide it? My view was the people will provide it, will provide the answers. Now by answers, colleagues, I do not mean wish lists. Look at the economy and say it must create jobs. It must reduce unemployment. It must reduce poverty. All of them very correct. But that's a wish list. It's not a program. To answer the question, practically, what is it you do that actually reduces unemployment? That's what the national dialogue must answer. That's why the people must answer this question. It's not going to come from the political parties. It's not going to come from anywhere else except the people. So that's national dialogue. In practical terms, Percy was trying to explain practically what the foundations have decided with regard to that. I'll give you just one example. You therefore, when you say the people must answer these questions, I'm saying not to produce a wish list, but to say practically when we say we must reduce the levels of poverty. So, very, very correct, very necessary. But practical how to do it. So the foundations decide you must ensure that there's a process by which the people of South Africa are actually part of this process. And as a consequence of that, they decide that they are going to be constituted, they divide the population into something like 32 different constituencies. One of those constituencies is women, youth, trade unions, business, traditional leaders, and so on, and the intelligentsia. Now let's just stay with the women as an example. So what the appropriatory committee will do, it will come to Professor Mutwa here and say to her, they will be invited into the national dialogue a delegation of 200 women. But that delegation of women must be inclusive. Black, white, young, old, rural, urban, whatever. Can you please, Professor Mutwa, put together that delegation? You can imagine how difficult it's going to be. Just for her now to talk to all of the women of South Africa to say, we've been invited, we have been given 200 delegates, but has to be very inclusive. So that by the time the National Convention takes place, there's a delegation of 200 women, properly constituted in terms of the criteria, like I'm talking about inclusiveness. So that no women in our country will say, but why were we excluded? Now what Percy was discussing this, what that delegation of women, as it's been constituted, they will have been told that there are 10 items on the agenda. The economy, social cohesion, whatever. So that as they prepare this delegation of 200 women, they are saying this delegation must be competent to discuss all 10 questions. I'm saying not with a view to producing a wish list, but with the capacity, these 200 women, they must have the capacity to say, what do we do about the economy? What do we do about the crime issue? What do we do about the issue of education? All of these matters. Now that would be true of all of these 32 delegations, one of which will be the intelligentsia. So the intelligentsia, like the women, like all others, will be presented with these 10 topics. These are the 10 topics of the national dialogue. What does the intelligentsia say about those issues? So when the intelligentsia of the Western Cape meets the way that it has today, it would have to look at that question. The national intelligentsia, given a delegation, I don't know how many, 100 people, how does it constitute that delegation? From the universities, from the TVET colleges and whatever else. And how does it prepare itself, that intelligentsia, to intervene with regard to all of these important matters? Not just about education or higher education, but about 10 different very important challenges facing the country. And I'm talking about the intelligentsia. These are our thought leaders. Professionally, the intelligentsia are thought leaders. The country depends on them, on their brains. They can't just come there about the quality and whatever else needs to be done about higher education. That one must talk about. We talked about it today. It's very important input into this national dialogue. And let me just give you, colleagues, my time is about to be out in 3.5 minutes. Some off-the-cuff ideas about what I'm trying to get at. For a number of years now, we've had the National Development Plan. I'm sure all of us are very familiar with it, with targets as to where the country should be by 2030 in 5 years' time. The National Development Plan. One very good thing about that National Development Plan is actually that it's very, very comprehensive in terms of the various topics that it deals with, and very detailed. But it's not a plan. It isn't. It's a vision. So when people ask themselves today, but South Africa has not changed as we visualized it in the plan, it's because there was never a plan to implement the plan. And I think that's the fault of the intelligentsia. Our intelligentsia failed to look at this matter and say, here is a very, very good vision about where South Africa should be by 2030 in terms of the economy, the education, the this, that, the health, and everything. But it's a vision. There's not a single sentence there which says, therefore, step number 1 on Monday will be the such and such in order to get to the vision. It doesn't exist. I'm saying, whose fault is that? It's the fault of the intelligentsia. They ought to have intervened to say, this is what needs to be done. I'm saying, it's exactly the kind of thing that must come out of the national dialogue. The people must answer that question. We have a very good vision. What is the plan? They take care. There's a judgment which I think is very important. I'll explain why. This is the decision of the Constitutional Court on whether decisions of the public protector are binding or not. You remember that thing? And the judgment was delivered by the then Chief Justice Mogoeng. One of the interesting it does, that judgment, is to describe the tasks and functions of the President of the Republic. And use a formula like that, the President is quintessentially a constitutional creation. And it has a lot of, these are the tasks of the President of the Republic. When you read that, one of the questions that arises is, but the manner in which we are electing the President is wrong. Because what happens, you know this, we have an election, Thabo Mbeki party is elected as the bigger party, the parliament convenes, and the biggest party proposes a candidate, and my candidate is Bongile Mutwa, and I've got 50%, 51% of the votes, and she's voted. But is she capable of carrying out these tasks? The question is never asked. It's never asked. We don't know whether this person is a fit and proper person to answer these questions. I'm saying, colleagues, the intelligentsia, the people who are training as lawyers, for instance, in our universities, who would have read that judgment maybe as part of their training. One of the things they must say in the national dialogue, the intelligentsia, we have to change the manner in which we choose our president. Because we must make sure that this person who becomes president must be competent to carry out all of these tasks which were detailed in that constitutional court decision. When Parliament said I must become president, they had not the slightest clue what I was capable of doing. And they never asked. I'm trying to give examples of what the national dialogue must do. There's a very, very good book. I'm mentioning this book because we're in the Eastern Cape. It's called Frontiers by Mostert. A very, very good history book, in my view. Many, many years ago, I said to one of the members of the executive committee of the Eastern Cape government, I asked him whether he has read this book. He hadn't heard about it. So I brought a copy for him. And I was saying to him, you know, the reason I'm giving you a copy of this thing is because my suggestion is, as part of your program, you are developing the Eastern Cape so that it economically develops great jobs and all of that. One of the things I would do is to follow what the Frontier says about the conflict between the colonizers and the people. It's a very, very detailed account. Where do these names come from? Grahamstown, Fort Hare, places like this. You can actually do a tourism route. Just take that book alone. You can do a tourism route and you would get the Germans to come. You would get the British to come. Even our own people would come and follow this route to learn about this particular time, about frontiers. If you are interested in developing tourism for the Eastern Cape, as part of your process of making sure that this economy develops, you reduce unemployment and all of that, that's one of the things I would do. I'm saying, Peggy, Ngomezu, that's part of the discussion task of this delegation of the intelligentsia, which is in the national dialogue. We need more people employed, poverty reduced. Question is how? Practically, what is to be done? The historians here at the National Mandela University, they've read that book. But having read it, understood it, and so on, what does intelligentsia say? These thought leaders of our country about this book, Frontiers. I'm suggesting one of the things that they could say is this one. I have a long time, running out of 15 minutes. Maybe the last thing I must mention in terms of these sorts of interventions, you know, about, I can't remember how many years back, 3, 4 young people were at high school, in a Johannesburg high school. They came to our foundation. And they said to us that they, as young people, these are matric students, have a problem. Because the history that we know, that history tells us one story, which that black people will always fail. And so we will look at the history, there's a history of slavery. We are taken as slaves. There's a history of colonialism, we are colonized. There's apartheid, we are oppressed. There's nothing in the history that we read, this is what the young people say, which say that as young people we can succeed. They say we can see the problems in the country, in South Africa now. But we are not motivated to say anything about how to solve them, because we know for a fact that we will fail. So, if foundations, what do we do about this? So we discussed it and said, you know, these young people are correct. We need to do something to change the circumstances of these young people, to tell them the opposite. And the opposite is that as black people, we're bound to succeed. But we need to tell them about a different sort of history. That's the task of the intelligentsia. What does intelligentsia say about changing this condition so that you don't have these young people who are demoralized, depressed, demotivated? Because the history that they've learned is a history which says black people always fail. So a few of us started working on something. One chapter in that, it was a small book. One chapter in that book was about Haiti, what people call Haiti. And I'm sure you know why I'm saying Haiti. That was the first black republic formally constituted on the 1st of January, 1804. And you know what had happened in that particular history? The African slaves in Haiti, the African slaves stood up, rose, took up arms against slavery. They defeated the British, they defeated the Spanish, they defeated the French. The historians here will know this thing that the Americans talk about the Louisiana Purchase. Because Louisiana was a French colony. But in the end, the French decided to sell it to the United States. That's what the Louisiana Purchase is about. Nobody asks the question, why did the French decide to sell Louisiana to the United States, their colony? It's because their army was defeated in Haiti. They couldn't defend this territory because the French army was defeated by the African slaves in Haiti. I don't know whether there are historians here to tell that history so that these young people can say, we didn't know our people could do that. And I'm saying the black slaves in Haiti, and in fact, this particular army, led by Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, and all of these people, was 60% first-generation slaves. They were fresh out of the continent. And they decided enough of the slavery. Stood up and defeated 3 European empires. When you tell that to young black students, matric students, you mean we did that? Exactly to make the point that this inferiority complex which you inherit, including from history, is wrong. I'm saying, Professor Mutwa, the intervention of the intelligentsia to answer questions of that kind. How do we defeat that sense of inferiority among our people? The intelligentsia must answer that question. This is national. I'm trying to say this is a national dialogue. There's a lot of discussion, debate about this national health, the NHI. Lot of, no, is it affordable, this and that and the other? If you take, this is what I'm told, if you take the health professionals, like Percy Matlati, the reason he's called Dr. Matlati is not because he's a philosopher, he's a medical doctor. What hasn't happened? I'm saying this partly because the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation is here, and he took a decision about this. What hasn't happened is that now no effort has been done to get the health professionals to say, let's sit together and resolve all of these questions that are being raised about the NHI. That intellectual input has not been made as part of the intelligentsia in order to answer these questions, what is to be done. When I called for national dialogue in April last year, it was clear to me that the only people who are going to answer these questions practically are the masses of the people. Because when the women are constituting their delegation of 200, what they are going to do is they're going to come to this university to say, NMU, one of the topics there is what we do about the economy. Can you please give us 2 women to be part of our delegation? The political parties are also invited to national dialogue. So the ANC, the DA, whoever else, they will all be invited. They will do the same. The ANC will come to NMU and say, NMU, One of the topics is education. Can you please give us a couple of people to be part of our delegation? So our intelligentsia is going to have that problem, to constitute its own delegation to discuss all these matters, but to supply the thought leaders to these other delegations that will come and say, please help us. How will the intelligentsia deal with both? What does the intelligentsia do? Percy Matlati can come back here and give you the 10 topics that are part of the agenda of national, so that as intelligentsia you can say, as the intelligentsia with our own delegation there, how will we respond to these things as intelligentsia? Because that delegation will be Nelson Mandela, Stellenbosch, Cape Town, Limpopo, KwaZulu. Is this a cohesive mixture? Can it in fact constitute one delegation? I don't know. But it will get an invitation to say, we invite the intelligentsia to come. I'm saying, colleagues, there are many of these questions. In the end, the national dialogue will happen, constituted with various 32 different constituencies, practically to provide questions, to answer this whole bundle of crises facing the country. Crisis in the economy, I'm saying, crisis in health, crisis in education, crisis everywhere, crisis in the politics. And the intelligentsia is a very important player in that process. As a delegation to answer these different questions, but as a resource for all of the other constituencies to help them to answer these questions. We did not discuss that today. What does our intensive intelligentsia do to respond to that national challenge? We discussed one element of it, which was higher education, very, very important. And that input must go into that national dialogue. But I'm saying our intelligentsia has got a much broader task. So the program directors, I've overrun my time by another 15 minutes. But thanks a lot for the initiative. But I think it's a beginning. It's a beginning of a different process. Not to discuss the state of higher education, but to discuss the question, what does our intelligentsia do practically to answer the questions about all of the different crises that are gripping our country? Because it has a responsibility. It has a responsibility. Because this is the only body of people in the country who can legitimately say, we are the thought leaders. There's nobody else. The politicians are not thought leaders. I don't know what they lead, but they're not thought leaders. It's only the intelligentsia that has to play this role of being thought leaders in terms of the provision of the practical answers to the question, what is to be done? So I'm saying, program directors, that I think our session is a beginning of the process of the intelligentsia of the Eastern Cape to position itself properly, to play this transformative role about society. And therefore become a very, very important player in a national dialogue, which must happen and will happen. But thanks a lot for coming.